My name is Rachel, and what I am about to share with you still feels like a wound that hasn't healed. Imagine this. You sacrifice your savings, your time, and your dreams, all to support the very people who should love you the most, only to be pushed aside as if you were a stranger. That's exactly what happened to me. I paid for my sister's wedding, every detail, every flower, every dress, but when the big day arrived, I wasn't even allowed to be there. And the worst part? The betrayal didn't come from strangers. It came from my own parents. I grew up in a household where family came first, or at least that's what my parents always told me. But over the years, I realized family first often meant my sister first. Her name is Emily, and she was the golden child. Beautiful, charming, always the favorite. If she sneezed, my parents would rush to her side. If I achieved something, they would barely clap. I learned early that I would always live in her shadow. But still, I loved her. She was my sister. I wanted the best for her even when it hurt me. After finishing college, I worked tirelessly, saving money for my own apartment and dreams. But when Emily announced her engagement, everything shifted. Suddenly, the entire household revolved around her wedding. And then came the demand. Not a request, not a gentle suggestion, a demand. "Rachel," my father said one evening, "you're working now, you have savings, you're her older sister. It's your duty to help. You'll cover the wedding costs." At first I laughed. I thought it was a joke. But when I saw the cold seriousness in his eyes, I realized they meant it. I tried to resist. "Dad, Mom, I've been saving for years. I'm planning for my future. Why should I be the one to pay?" My mother didn't hesitate. "Because Emily deserves the best. She's the bride. She can't worry about money. And what are you saving for anyway? You're single. You don't need much." Those words pierced me deeper than a knife. You're single. You don't need much. As if my life, my goals, my independence, none of it mattered. I argued. I cried. But in the end, I gave in. Maybe it was fear of being cast out. Maybe it was hope that doing this would finally earn their respect. So I signed checks. I swiped my card. I emptied my savings account. The venue? Paid. The designer dress Emily wanted? Paid. The flowers, the decorations, the catering? Paid. Even the honeymoon tickets to Italy, I covered them. Every penny I had worked for vanished into this fairy tale wedding that wasn't even mine. And yet, through all of it, I told myself, it's okay. At least they'll appreciate me. At least Emily will know I sacrificed for her. At least I'll be part of this day. But I couldn't have been more wrong. The week before the wedding, I noticed whispers between my parents and Emily. Plans were made without me. Conversations stopped when I walked in the room. Something was off. Finally, the night before the ceremony, I asked Emily directly, "Why are you acting so secretive? Did I miss something?" She looked away, biting her lip. And then she said the words that shattered me. "Rachel, Mom and Dad think it's best if you don't come tomorrow." I thought I misheard. "What do you mean? I paid for everything. Why wouldn't I come?" Her voice trembled, but her words were clear. "They think you'll draw attention. You're too outspoken. This day needs to be perfect. They don't want any distractions." Distractions. That's what I was to them. Not a daughter, not a sister. A distraction. I begged. I pleaded. But my parents stood firm. My father's voice was ice cold. "You've done your part financially. Now step aside and let Emily shine. Don't ruin this for her." And just like that, I was erased. The next day, while Emily walked down the aisle in the dress I paid for, surrounded by flowers I had chosen, in a venue I had booked, I sat alone in my small apartment. My savings gone, my heart broken, my family ties severed. But betrayal doesn't end in silence. That day, I made a promise to myself. If they thought they could use me and throw me away, they were wrong. Because I wasn't going to stay the quiet, forgotten sister anymore. I was going to show them what it felt like to be left in the shadows. And my revenge? It wouldn't be loud, but it would be unforgettable. The days after the wedding felt like a blur of silence and anger. I avoided phone calls from my parents. I didn't answer Emily's texts. I sat in my apartment, staring at the empty bank account I had once been so proud of. My future plans, buying my own home, investing in a small business I had dreamed of, were gone, poured into an event I wasn't even allowed to witness. I kept replaying their words in my head. You're single. You don't need much. You've done your part financially. Now step aside. Those sentences looped over and over, fueling a fire inside me. I couldn't believe it. My own family had treated me like a bank account, not a person. For days, I felt helpless. But slowly, the helplessness turned into something else. Determination. If they saw me as nothing but a wallet, I was going to change that image forever. I wasn't going to be the quiet, forgotten sister anymore. I was going to make them regret ever underestimating me. It started small. I began gathering information, old emails, messages, receipts. I realized something as I pieced them together. My parents had not only taken my money, they had manipulated the truth. To relatives, they had told a different story. They said the wedding was a family-funded effort where everyone contributed. They never once mentioned that I had paid for everything. That's when the first part of my plan formed. If they wanted to erase me from their narrative, I would bring myself back in the loudest way possible. A week later, my aunt called me. She said, "Rachel, why weren't you at the wedding? Everyone was asking. Your parents told us you didn't want to come." My chest tightened. So not only had they excluded me, they had lied about me. According to them, I was the selfish sister who chose not to attend. I realized then, my revenge didn't even need to be cruel. The truth itself was enough to destroy their perfect little story. I started sharing it. Quietly at first. I told my aunt the real reason I wasn't there. I explained how I had paid for everything and then been barred from coming. She was horrified. She told my uncle, who told my cousins, and soon whispers spread like wildfire. Every time a relative called to clarify, I calmly repeated the truth. No shouting, no anger, just cold facts. Yes, I covered the wedding. No, I wasn't invited. You can ask Mom and Dad why. The shame started to spread, and I could feel it. My parents called me one night, furious. My father's voice thundered through the phone. "How dare you talk to the family about private matters? You're trying to ruin your sister's happiness." I let him rage. And then, in the calmest tone I could manage, I said, "I didn't ruin her happiness. You did. I just told the truth. If the truth makes you look bad, maybe you should rethink your choices." That shut him up. For the first time in my life, I felt power. Real power. But I wasn't done. I knew they valued appearances more than anything. Their reputation in the community, their pride in being the perfect family. So I hit them where it hurt. I went through all the receipts and compiled them into a neat folder. Every expense, every payment, every swipe of my card. Then, I mailed copies. Not to the family, but to Emily herself, along with a letter. In that letter, I wrote, "You walked down the aisle in a dress I paid for, in a hall I rented, with flowers I arranged, and yet you let them erase me. You let them humiliate me. Never forget. Your perfect wedding was built on my sacrifice, and I will never forget what you allowed to happen." I didn't know how she'd react, but a week later, I found out. Emily showed up at my apartment. Her eyes were red, as if she'd been crying for days. She confessed that she had felt guilty but was too afraid to stand up to Mom and Dad. She begged me to forgive her. But forgiveness doesn't come easy when betrayal cuts that deep. I told her, "You had a choice. You could have fought for me. Instead, you let me be cast aside. That's something I won't forget." She left in tears, and strangely, I didn't feel sorry. For once, I felt like they were all finally experiencing the pain I had carried for years. But this was just the beginning. Because revenge, when done carefully, doesn't end with whispers and guilt. It grows, it spreads, and soon I had a plan that would shake their perfect little world even more. I started thinking bigger. Whispers and letters had opened doors I didn't know were closed. But whispers alone wouldn't be enough to break the image my parents had carefully built. They were respected in our community, the kind of people whose name opened doors at PTA meetings and neighborhood fundraisers. Their reputation was their armor, and I planned to chip away at it piece by piece. First, I needed witnesses. Money and receipts had embarrassed them to relatives, but I wanted undeniable proof that would reach beyond our family. Something public. Something people couldn't ignore. So I did what felt both risky and necessary. I collected everything. Contracts, bank statements, the wedding invoices with my name on them, texts where my mother instructed vendors to bill me, emails from the florist confirming my payments. I organized it, labeled it, documented every interaction. I was methodical. I wanted there to be no room for gaslighting. Then I drafted the message. I didn't want to sound vengeful or spiteful. I wanted to sound honest. I wrote down, without embellishment, what happened. How I'd saved for years, how my parents demanded I pay, how they lied to relatives, and finally how they excluded me. I described the hollow feeling of watching the wedding photos, her smile framed by decorations I had paid for, while I sat alone and broke. I wrote about the humiliation, not to shame them with melodrama, but to give context to the facts I was presenting. When I hit post, my heart hammered so loudly I thought the neighbors would hear it. I uploaded a carefully worded post to a community group that my parents and many relatives frequented. I attached copies of a few receipts and redacted account numbers for safety. I didn't name-call, I didn't threaten, I only told the truth. At first, the response was slow. A few comments, some sympathetic messages from old school friends I hadn't spoken to in years. Then a cousin shared the post to his feed. Then another relative chimed in with memories of being dismissed too. It escalated in a way I hadn't fully expected. People who'd always seen my parents as paragons of family values started posting comments like, "I had no idea," and "This sounds wrong." The post was shared, talked about, and every share felt like a small victory. But with attention came pushback. My parents were furious. My inbox filled with calls and texts, threats of legal action, requests to take the post down, and the classic guilt trap messages. "Rachel, you're making this public and embarrassing us. Think of the family." I saved every message. Each angry email was another piece of proof that my story wasn't fabricated. The turning point came when a local community blog reached out. They wanted to hear my side because residents were asking questions. I agreed to speak, prepared the same factual recounting, and let them interview me. A few days later, an article ran that included portions of my receipts and a direct quote from me about being excluded. The comments underneath the article were a mix of shock and support. People started calling our house to ask questions. Friends and neighbors who once nodded politely were now asking my parents about what had happened. The armor my parents relied on began to crack. At home, the atmosphere changed. My father avoided eye contact. My mother's polite facade slipped into frantic repairs, calls to relatives, defensive messages to neighbors, and frantic attempts to spin the narrative back in their favor. They tried to accuse me of seeking attention, of fabricating things to hurt Emily. It was predictable and petty, but for the first time in years, they had to answer for their choices in public. For the first time, their perfect family was being questioned by people outside their circle. There was a strange satisfaction in seeing them uncomfortable, but it wasn't what I'd imagined. This wasn't about enjoying their pain. It was about reclaiming truth and dignity. As the public scrutiny grew, so did small acts of restitution. A distant aunt called and said she'd always suspected something but never had proof. "I'm so sorry," she said, voice trembling. "I wish I had known earlier." A former neighbor, who'd once been close to my parents, sent a message. "If you want, I can testify about attending the wedding planning meetings where you were never included. It's unfair." Emily, meanwhile, became a complicated figure in my life. Sometimes she called, apologizing and promising to help fix things. Other times she avoided me, afraid of the fallout. I didn't rush to forgive her. Forgiveness required honesty and effort, not just a few tearful words. But I did tell her that if she truly regretted it, actions mattered more than apologies. She said she would speak with Mom and Dad. She said she would tell people the truth. I waited, skeptical. The pressure mounted. My parents lost a few invitations to community events. Some of their volunteer roles were quietly reassigned. Neighbors who once greeted them with a smile now offered curt nods. It was painful to watch, even from the outside, because humiliation is a heavy weight to carry no matter who shoulders it. I reminded myself, often, that the goal wasn't to crush them entirely, but to ensure they couldn't comfortably erase people anymore. Then came the legal threat. My father, angry and desperate, filed a defamation notice through an attorney. I had expected this possibility. I had saved every email, every invoice, every text. I sent the attorney copies of the evidence. The lawyer representing my parents demanded retraction and apology. I refused. I hired a modest attorney of my own to ensure everything I posted was accurate and defensible. The legal exchange itself became another form of exposure, formal letters that laid out facts and counterclaims. My parents realized the mess had become more than just gossip. It required documentation and accountability. As the weeks turned into months, our family dynamic shifted into something unrecognizable. Holidays were awkward, then cold, and eventually, there were fewer family gatherings altogether. My parents retreated into their shell of dignity, while Emily learned, perhaps painfully, that a fairy tale wedding doesn't erase moral choices. The glow of her wedding photos dimmed under the weight of what she'd done. But even as the public vindication grew, I felt the ache of what I had lost. Money could be regained. Reputation could be mended. Maybe not fully, but enough. Trust was the thing that might never return. I had wanted to belong, to be honored for my sacrifice. What I got instead was a complex mixture of justice and sorrow. And yet, one night when I was alone and exhausted from the legal back and forth, I found an old photo of Emily and me as children, laughing with ice cream on our faces. I held it for a long time. The image reminded me why I started this fight. Not for revenge alone, but to protect myself and to demand the dignity every person deserves. When the inevitable confrontation came, it wasn't planned. It wasn't a holiday or some special family event. It happened one ordinary Sunday evening when I got a call from Emily. Her voice was shaky. "Rachel, Mom and Dad want to talk. Please. They said they'll meet you at their house tonight. Just come. It's important." I almost laughed. Important? Now things were important? After years of being invisible, after being treated like a distraction at my own sister's wedding, suddenly my presence was urgent. Still, something inside me told me to go. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe I needed to look them in the eye and finally let it all out. I drove to the house slowly, the familiar streets looking strange under the weight of what was about to happen. My heart raced as I parked and walked up the steps I'd climbed 1,000 times as a child. The door opened before I knocked. My mother stood there looking tired, older somehow, her pride cracked by weeks of scrutiny. Inside, my father sat stiffly in his chair, arms crossed, jaw tight. Emily hovered in the corner, her eyes darting between us like a referee in a match she didn't want to watch. The silence was suffocating until my father spoke. "Rachel," he began, his voice steady but heavy with strain. "This has gone too far. You've humiliated us. You've embarrassed this family." I felt a surge of anger rise, but I kept my tone calm. "No, Dad. I didn't humiliate you. You did that yourselves. All I did was tell the truth." My mother flinched as if I had slapped her. "You don't understand," she said softly. "We only wanted what was best for Emily. A perfect day. A beautiful memory." "A perfect day?" I snapped, my voice breaking. "You think perfection is built on betrayal? You think a beautiful memory comes from excluding your own daughter? Do you even realize what you've done to me?" The words hung in the air. My father's hands gripped the chair tighter, his knuckles white. "You're dramatizing this. Families make sacrifices. You're the older sister. You should have understood your role." My chest tightened. "My role? My role is not to be your bank account. My role is not to disappear so Emily can shine. I'm your daughter, too. Or did you forget that?" Emily stepped forward then, her voice trembling. "Stop. Please, stop. This isn't helping. Rachel's right. You hurt her. You hurt all of us. You used her, and I let it happen. And I'm sorry." Her eyes filled with tears as she turned toward me. "I was weak. I should have fought for you, but I didn't. And every day since the wedding, I've felt guilty." Hearing her say it out loud was like a knife and a bandage at the same time. It cut, but it also gave me a strange relief. Finally, someone in this house was admitting the truth. But my father wasn't ready to surrender. His pride wouldn't let him. "You think posting lies online, dragging our name through the mud is justice? You think people will respect you now? You've destroyed this family." I stood tall, my voice steady. "No, Dad. You destroyed this family the moment you decided I wasn't good enough to sit in that ceremony. You destroyed it when you told me my life didn't matter because I was single. Don't put this on me." For once, he had no words. He looked away, his jaw clenched, his silence louder than any argument. My mother began to cry softly, whispering things like, "We didn't mean to," and "We thought we were doing the right thing." But those excuses felt empty. Intentions don't erase damage. I turned to Emily. "Do you really want to fix this? Or do you just want to stop feeling guilty?" She swallowed hard. "Both. I don't know how, but I want to make it right." I nodded slowly. "Then start by telling the truth yourself. Tell people what happened. Don't let Mom and Dad keep painting me as the selfish one. If you really regret it, you'll stand with me, not behind me." Her face tightened with fear, but she nodded. "I will." That night, I didn't walk away with forgiveness. I didn't walk away with a neat, happy ending. But I walked away with something better. Clarity. They couldn't gaslight me anymore. They couldn't twist the story to make me doubt myself. The truth was out. They were exposed. Over the next few weeks, Emily kept her promise. She began telling the truth to relatives, to friends. Slowly, the narrative shifted. People realized I hadn't been bitter or jealous. I had been wronged. And the more she spoke, the heavier the guilt weighed on my parents. It wasn't dramatic, like in the movies. No big showdown in front of hundreds of guests. No tearful apology broadcast to the world. But in its own way, it was more powerful. It was the quiet collapse of an empire built on favoritism and lies. For the first time in my life, I felt like I wasn't the forgotten sister anymore. I was the one who stood up, who fought back, who demanded to be seen. But even as justice settled, the question lingered. Could I ever forgive them? Could I ever truly heal from the betrayal of being erased from the most important day in my sister's life? That answer, I realized, wasn't simple, and it was one I would have to face alone. In the months that followed, life settled into a strange rhythm. On the surface, things were quieter. No explosive arguments, no late-night angry calls. But underneath, the fractures in our family were still wide and raw. Emily tried the hardest to mend things. She called often, sent little messages, and even invited me over for dinner at her new apartment. Sometimes I went, sometimes I didn't. I appreciated her effort, but every time I looked at her, I couldn't stop remembering the night she stood by and let my parents cast me out. Forgiveness is complicated. It doesn't bloom just because someone says, "I'm sorry." My parents, on the other hand, changed very little in words, but their behavior told a different story. They were quieter when I visited, careful with their words. No more demands, no more dismissing comments about my life or my choices. It wasn't an apology, not directly, but it was an acknowledgement that they could no longer treat me like an afterthought. That small shift, though subtle, was proof that the truth had left its mark. But here's the thing about betrayal. Even when people change, the wound doesn't vanish. Some nights, I lay awake thinking about everything I had lost. Not just the money, but the trust, the sense of belonging I thought I had in my own family. I wondered if things could ever go back to the way they were. Deep down, I knew the answer. They couldn't. And maybe they shouldn't. Instead of trying to rebuild what was broken, I decided to build something new. I started focusing on myself again. I picked up extra shifts at work, began saving again, and slowly watched my account balance rise. Every dollar I saved felt like reclaiming a piece of my stolen future. I even revisited my old dream of starting a small business, this time determined that no one, not even family, would take it away from me. I also began to build a chosen family. Friends who had supported me through the ordeal became like siblings. Neighbors who showed kindness felt more like parents than my own. I realized family isn't always about blood. Sometimes it's about loyalty, about who stands with you when the storm hits. And yet, despite the pain, there was a strange silver lining. For the first time, my parents were forced to see me. Not as the spare daughter, not as the one who lived in Emily's shadow, but as a person with power, with a voice. They might never say it out loud, but I knew they feared losing me completely. And that fear made them treat me with the respect I had long deserved. Emily and I eventually had one final heart-to-heart. She admitted she had been terrified to oppose our parents, terrified of being cut off from their love if she stood by me. "I was selfish," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I thought keeping the peace was easier than fighting for what was right, but peace built on someone else's pain isn't peace at all." For the first time, I believed her, truly believed her. And in that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: release. Maybe it wasn't full forgiveness yet, but it was a step toward it. I still haven't decided if I'll ever forgive my parents completely. Some scars run too deep. But I have learned this. Forgiveness isn't about excusing what happened. It's about freeing yourself from carrying the weight of someone else's choices. It's about saying, "You hurt me, but you don't get to define me." Looking back, I see the irony. My parents thought excluding me from Emily's wedding would erase me, would silence me. Instead, it did the opposite. It gave me a voice I never thought I had. It made me stronger, braver, louder. And if there's one lesson I want anyone to take from my story, it's this: never let anyone, family, friend, or stranger, convince you that your worth is less. Never let them use your love as a weapon against you. And above all, remember this: truth, no matter how painful, will always shine brighter than the prettiest lie. So yes, they forced me to pay for a wedding and then excluded me. Yes, they betrayed me in a way that still echoes in my heart. But in doing so, they also set me free. Free from the chains of favoritism. Free from silence. Free to finally choose myself. And that, in the end, is the sweetest revenge of all.